What would you do if a mother carrying two newborns stumbled barefoot through a blizzard, escaping a man who once promised her protection? In the heart of Montana's frozen wilderness, a half-wild German shepherd stood guard over her shattered world. This is not just a story of survival, it's about justice, forgiveness, and the fire we carry through the cold. Where are you watching this from? Leave a comment and let us know. And if you believe in the strength of mothers, in the loyalty of dogs, and in miracles hidden beneath snow, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will warm your soul on Real Stories. The wind screamed like a living thing, tearing through the pine-covered ridges of the Bitterroot Mountains, flinging shards of snow into the face of the young woman stumbling through the drifts. Clara Ridgway, 26, pressed her torn shawl tighter around her chest, her breath catching in ragged gasps beneath that thin barrier. Her arms trembled from the weight of her newborn twins, bundled together inside a faded quilt, one borrowed from a bed she hadn't been allowed to say goodbye to. Clara was a striking woman, even in suffering. Her auburn hair, tangled and matted with ice, framed a face once described as classical, high cheekbones, full mouth, and clear green eyes now swollen red with cold and tears. Her figure, once strong from working the land with her late husband, Joseph, had grown thin in recent weeks. Sleepless nights and hunger had carved hollows beneath her eyes, but her back remained unbent. She was tall for a woman, and even now, with bare feet breaking through crusted snow, she moved with the grace of someone who once believed in love. 6 hours earlier, she'd still believed it was possible to build something real with Galen Thornwright. Galen, the man who had taken her in after Joseph's death, had once seemed like a gentleman, refined, handsome, with his coal black hair always neatly slicked and his suits tailored from New York wool. A self-made landowner, he spoke with confidence that cloaked his cruelty well. But Clara had seen the truth today. Seen it the moment his mouth curled in disgust at the truth of her children's bloodline. Theirs, she had whispered, referring to Joseph, her Lakota husband. Galen had gone still. Then colder than the wind outside. Half-breeds, he had spat. You tricked me. Let the storm raise them if it chooses. And he'd opened the door. Told his men to drag her out without boots or coat. If she lives till dawn, he'd muttered. It's God's doing, not mine. Clara's lips had turned blue by the time she reached the tree line beyond the estate. Her legs buckled often now, but she refused to let go of her children. Snow gathered in her skirt's torn hem. The twins whimpered faintly, a hoarse, pitiful rasp. Mama's here, she whispered, pressing her face to the crown of a small head. Mama will find a way. But there was no way. Not in this wilderness. Not in this storm. Until she saw him, or rather it. A figure broke from the curtain of snow like a vision summoned by fever. A large dog bounding toward her. Its coat a striking blend of sable and black, like smoke over iron. The German shepherd stopped some yards away, panting, head tilted, golden eyes sharp. He was a magnificent creature, clearly well cared for, about 5 years old. His muscles were thick under his coat. His ears upright, but it was the intelligence in his gaze that made Clara weep. Something in his stare seemed purposeful. Not wild, not lost, please, Clara whispered. Please, the dog barked once, then turned, walked several paces, stopped, looked back, and waited. Clara's legs felt like lead, but she followed. She didn't know how long they walked. Each second became a prayer. Her fingers had long gone numb. Her feet bled somewhere beneath the ice. She knew the edge of death when it brushed her shoulder. And still she followed the dog because it was all she had left to follow. She didn't see the cabin until they were nearly upon it, half buried in snow, nestled against a rocky outcrop, smoke rising in a thin thread from the chimney. Her knees gave out then, the final ounce of wool leaving her bones. She collapsed into the snow, pressing her babies to her chest. The last thing she saw was the door swinging open, light spilling out into the storm, and a silhouette, a man's broad frame, motionless at first, then moving quickly toward her. His name was Wade Ashford. Wade was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with a hard-worn face that carried stories in every scar. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and he wore it loosely tied at the nape of his neck. His beard was short but unkempt, flecked with frost. He moved with the efficiency of a man who lived by necessity, not comfort, wool coat belted tight, boots laced over rough-spun pants, a hunting knife sheathed at his hip. Solitude had etched itself into his posture, and grief into his eyes. He'd built the cabin with his own hands 5 years ago, after the fire took his wife and 2 daughters. Since then, he had spoken to no one save the trees and the wind. His only companion had been Finn, the same German shepherd who now stood beside Clara's prone form, tail twitching anxiously. Wade knelt in the snow, his large hands, scarred but gentle, brushed back Clara's frozen hair. Her pulse was faint, but there. "Sweet Lord," he muttered. "What in hell?" The baby stirred. Wade didn't think. He lifted Clara easily. She weighed little more than a child herself and carried her inside. Finn circled them once, then bounded ahead, already nosing blankets toward the hearth. The cabin was small but solid. The heat of the fire hit Clara's body in waves, her shawl steaming instantly. Wade laid her near the flames, unwrapped the quilt, and placed the 2 infants gently on a fur-lined cot beside her. Their faces were pink and waxy. Their breathing shallow. Clara murmured something, Joseph's name, maybe. Wade didn't ask. Instead, he moved fast. Buckets of warmed water, cloths, herbs crushed from jars he hadn't opened in years. His hands worked with instinct, as if memory alone could save them. Finn watched, never once sitting. The dog stood between Wade and the door, alert, protective, eyes flicking back to Clara every few seconds as the fire burned low and the storm held outside. Wade finally sat back on his heels. He had seen death before, but this woman had outrun it for now. He looked at Finn. The dog looked back. "You brought them here," Wade whispered. "Why?" Finn tilted his head. There was no answer in words. Only in the quiet rise and fall of 3 fragile chests, the fire crackled, and the snow fell like forgiveness from the sky. The fire had burned low by the time the first rays of morning pierced the frost-laced windows of Wade Ashford's cabin. Outside, the storm had lessened into a hush of falling snow, gentler now, but thick, muffling the world beneath its white hush. Inside, silence reigned, broken only by the occasional crackle of a drying log and the shallow breathing of the woman on the floor. Clara stirred just past dawn. Her eyes opened slowly, hesitant, as if she feared what they might find. Her first breath hitched. Then came the second, steadier, and she blinked rapidly, trying to place herself. The scent of wood smoke, the warmth. Her babies. Her babies. She jolted upright only to fall back with a sharp cry of pain in her shoulders. Her muscles had locked up in the cold. Wade was beside her in an instant. His weathered face tense but calm. "They're safe," he said in a voice so steady it calmed the very air. "They're sleeping over there." Clara turned her head, eyes falling on the 2 tiny bundles swaddled in fur beside the hearth. She burst into tears. Not dramatic sobs, but the quiet unraveling of a soul that had held itself together too long. Wade stood awkwardly. He was a man used to trees, not tears. "You'll need broth," he muttered and moved to the stove. Finn, the German shepherd, remained close to Clara. His body relaxed but watchful. She met the dog's eyes and touched his head. "You found me," she whispered. "You beautiful soul. You found me." Wade returned with a bowl, crouching beside her again. "You need salt and warmth. Just sip." Clara obeyed. The broth was bitter but hot, and it revived her in small waves. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured. "Don't need to," Wade replied. "My dog brought you. That was his choice." She looked up at him for the first time with clarity. Wade had a face that bore both time and weather, sharp lines from years under sun and wind, a strong nose, tired eyes that held pain but not cruelty. His clothes were worn but clean. His cabin modest but well kept. The silence in the room was not one of neglect but of deliberate solitude. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Me and the dog." "You saved me," she said softly, then added with rising panic. "But they'll come looking." Wade raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Clara took a long breath. "Galen Thornwright. He's powerful, and when he finds out I'm alive," she stopped, looked down at her hands. "He won't let me stay that way." Wade nodded slowly. You're not the first person to come to these woods looking to disappear. Clara leaned back against the wall, letting the fire warm her side. I didn't come to disappear. I was thrown away. A silence stretched again. Finn shifted, curling beside her. Wade studied the fire. Then maybe it's time you decided what happens next. Later that morning, a new voice cut through the snowbound calm. A knock, firm and deliberate, against the wooden door. Wade froze. Clara's breath caught. Finn stood immediately, a low rumble vibrating in his throat. Wade opened the door, revealing a man wrapped in a buffalo-hide coat, his shoulders broad, his beard thick and white with frost. His name was Jonas Lark, an old trapper who visited once a season to barter for supplies. He was in his 60s, with a back like an oak beam and hands knotted from a life of cutting wood and skinning game. Snow's bad, Jonas said, brushing ice from his eyebrows. Herd wolves 2 ridges north. His eyes fell on Clara almost immediately. You got company. She was half dead in the snow, Wade said. You know I don't ask for trouble, Jonas. Jonas stepped inside, his eyes lingering on the twins, his expression softened. You don't have to ask for it. It finds its way here all the same. He was kind to Clara in a simple, quiet way, offered her jerky from his pouch, asked no questions, but took in every detail. Your eyes, he said thoughtfully. You got Lakota in your children, don't you? Clara nodded. That'll matter, he said to some. He stayed only long enough to check Wade's traps near the creek and left with a final warning. You feel it, don't you? Something coming. This storm ain't the last. That night, Clara held her twins, Eva and Elias, and told them stories under the flickering light. She spoke of Joseph, their father, his smile, the songs he sang in Lakota around the fire. Her voice shook when she spoke of the day the fever took him. He was the only place I ever belonged, she whispered. Wade listened from across the room, silent as ever, but something shifted in him. That evening, while Clara slept with the babies curled beside her, Wade sat by the fire and carved a small toy horse from a block of pine. His hands moved with a skill born of grief. This was not the first child's toy he'd made. The last one had been for his daughter, Lena, 5 years ago. Lena had been 5 when the fire came. Wade never spoke of her. But tonight, as he worked, the image of Lena's crooked smile haunted him. That smile had once been enough to keep him living. When he lost her, he buried not just her body, but himself. Until now, until this woman and her children walked into his cabin and set old grief aflame the next morning, Clara woke to find the toy horse beside her babies. She picked it up gently, tracing its smooth edges. She said nothing, but when she looked up at Wade across the room, her eyes no longer held fear. Outside, the sky had turned a shade of steel. The forest was quiet, holding its breath, and somewhere far below the ridges, Galen Thornwright sat at his polished oak desk, a telegram in hand, his jaw tight. A tracker he'd hired reported nothing. But Galen didn't believe in loose ends. He stood, walked to the fire, and tossed the telegram in. I want her found, he said to the man standing by the window. I want to know she's dead. The man nodded. His name was Silas Glay, a professional tracker with eyes like a hawk and a heart like iron. Tall, lean, with a long brown coat and gloves that never came off. He never asked questions. He just followed footprints. Snow's heavy, Silas said. But every storm leaves a trail. As Wade and Clara built something fragile in the cabin above the tree line, the hunt had already begun below. But for now, there was only warmth, breath, and the slow-burning fire between them. The wind returned with a vengeance by nightfall. No longer the soft hush of settling snow, but a rising howl that curled beneath the cabin's eaves and pressed against the windows like invisible fists. Outside, the forest turned restless, branches clawing at the sky, unseen things cracking in the dark. The fire inside snapped and hissed. But Clara Ridgway felt safer than she had in weeks. Wade had repaired a loose shutter that morning. The warmth of the hearth was steady. The babies had stopped shivering. But deep in her chest, unease churned like a second heartbeat. Wade noticed it, too. He moved more slowly that day, his eyes tracking the tree line every time he stepped outside for wood. His German shepherd, Finn, mirrored him in body and instinct. The dog didn't bark. He never barked unless it mattered, but he sniffed the air and refused to stray from Clara's side. When Elias fussed that evening, Finn pressed his nose gently to the baby's cheek, as if to check for fever, then turned toward the door and growled, barely audible. Wade was chopping frozen elk meat by the stove when Clara finally voiced what had been building in her for hours. "He'll come," she said. "Galen, he'll send someone." Wade didn't look up from his task. "I know." She watched him move, a rhythm of sharp efficiency. He hadn't asked for details about Galen Thornwright, and she hadn't told him everything, but he understood danger when he saw it, and he was preparing quietly, systematically. Clara pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and leaned closer to the fire. "I never used to be afraid of snow. When I was little, I loved it. My father would take me sledding behind the barn. My hair would freeze and I'd laugh until my lungs hurt." Wade said nothing. "It's strange," she added. "How something that once felt like joy can start to feel like a warning." Outside, the wind moaned as if in agreement. By late morning the next day, the sky was white with weight. The snowfall had paused, but Wade knew the stillness wouldn't last. He decided to scout east toward the ridgeline that overlooked the nearest valley trail. It was the only real access point from town where any hunter would come from. "I won't be long," he told Clara as he layered his heavy flannel and sheepskin coat. "If I'm not back by sundown, you stay inside. Lock the door. Use the rifle if you have to." She nodded, though the weight in her chest thickened. "Take Finn." But the dog stayed beside her, unmoving. Wade blinked. "Finn?" Finn gave a low whine but didn't budge. Clara looked down. Eva was asleep in her lap. Elias was nestled beside her. "He wants to stay with us." Wade studied the animal, then gave a short nod. "Smart dog," he turned and left. Footsteps muffled by the deep snow. That afternoon stretched like a thread, taut and fraying. Clara kept the babies warm, boiled more roots into broth, and tried to practice the Lakota lullabies Joseph used to hum. Finn paced near the windows, tail low, ears pivoting with every sound. Around dusk, Clara saw the smoke. It wasn't from Wade's chimney. It rose beyond the far tree line, thinner than their own fire. New, recent, too far to be harmless. She stood slowly, heart tightening. By the time Wade returned, his face windburned and his gloves damp, Clara had already packed a small satchel with essentials, for wraps, dried meat, a flask of water. Her eyes met his before he even stepped inside. "You saw it?" she asked. "I did," he replied. "Campfire, small, controlled. Galen. Not him, but someone good, experienced." He stripped off his gloves and knelt by the hearth. He was moving slow, alone. "Might be scouting. I covered my tracks on the way back, but he'll find this cabin eventually." Finn stood beside him, ears upright. "What do we do?" Clara asked. Wade took a long moment before answering. "We prepare. If he comes alone, maybe we talk. If he brings others, we move." Finn's ears twitched. The wind had dropped. Clara turned toward the door. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat with the babies, now dozing in the furs, and watched the shadows move on the walls. Wade carved another figure by firelight, a small bear, this time for Elias. His hands moved with memory and grief. "Finally," he said, "you never told me why Galen turned on you. What changed?" Clara's mouth tightened. She waited a full minute before answering. "Because I told him the truth." She looked toward the fire. "When Joseph died of fever, I was alone. No money, no land, no kin who'd take me in. Galen came along with silver on his tongue. Promised protection. Future. I thought if I gave him honesty, he'd give me decency." She touched Elias's tiny hand. "But when I told him the twins were Joseph's, his eyes changed. It wasn't just anger. It was hatred, like I tricked him, like he'd touched something unclean. I think he wanted me dead before I ever left the room." Wade said nothing, but she saw his jaw flex. The next morning broke colder. The sky was slate gray. Wade decided to check the southern perimeter while Clara took the babies into the cellar briefly to stretch and move without smoke stinging their eyes. It was there, under the frost-covered floorboards, that Clara found something unexpected: a child's shoe, small, worn smooth, still holding a twist of blonde hair tangled in the laces. She stared at it, breath caught in her throat. When Wade returned, she said nothing at first, simply handed it to him. He didn't speak for a long while. When he did, it was not in explanation, but in confession. Her name was Lena, my daughter, 5 years old. He looked at the shoe in his hand like it was a sacred relic. The fire started one night while I was out tracking. Someone left a lantern burning. I came back and there was nothing left. Not my wife, not Lena. He closed his hand around the shoe. Until you showed up. I hadn't spoken a word out loud in 3 months. Clara swallowed. I'm sorry. He gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. So am I. But maybe it was time. That evening, as snow began to fall again, Wade moved the rifle to the wall beside the front door. He loaded his revolver, packed rations. Tomorrow, we send a message, he told Clara. To who? To whoever lit that fire, he said. If they're decent, we find out. If they're not, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Finn lay between them, watching, waiting. The morning light filtered through the dense branches like shafts of cold steel. It had snowed heavily again in the night, erasing footprints, burying traps, and swallowing the memory of roads. Wade Ashford stood at the edge of the tree line, boots sunk deep into powder, shoulders stiff with cold and readiness. The rifle slung across his back wasn't for hunting. He was watching a thin line of smoke rising a quarter-mile downhill, curling from the pines with the calculated control of a man who knew exactly how to keep warm without drawing attention. Beside him, Finn sat motionless, amber eyes fixed in the same direction. The German shepherd's fur bristled with silent alertness, his body tense but grounded like a coiled spring that would only snap if necessary. Wade knelt beside him and muttered low. We find out who this is, boy. Then we decide. They moved like ghosts through the trees, Wade with practiced silence. Finn matching him step for step. The wind was light but sharp, whispering through the high boughs with the hush of breath over bone. When they finally reached a clearing, Wade froze. A single figure knelt beside a low burning fire, back to them, methodically cleaning a pair of heavy boots. The man was tall and lean, wrapped in a fur-lined brown duster, wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A rifle rested on a log nearby within easy reach. Wade circled quietly and stepped out from the brush. His voice calm but firm. You've picked the wrong mountain for wandering. The man didn't startle. He finished tying his boots, then looked up slowly. His face was long, angular, with skin browned by wind and sun, and eyes a pale, icy blue, clear and unreadable. He stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. My name's Silas Glay, he said, voice deep and even, the draw faintly southern. You must be the one took her in. Wade didn't blink. You're not lost. Silas shook his head. I'm a tracker hired to follow the snow. His eyes flicked to Finn. That dog smart covered her scent longer than most humans could have. What do you want? I came to see, Silas gestured around him. I'm not the only man Galen Thornwright sent. I'm just the first, the quiet one. Wade's hand hovered near his rifle strap. You plan to bring her back? Silas didn't answer right away. I read faces for a living. Saw the Prince woman, 2 kids, no blood, no signs of force. I know a rescue from a kidnapping. She wasn't running from you. She was running for her life. Wade studied him. The man had the bearing of someone who'd seen war but never boasted about it. A loner paid to observe, not command. You going to lie to Thornwright? Wade asked. Silas smirked faintly. I don't lie. I just leave out details. But you and the lady need to know more men are coming. Thornwright's not content with rumors. He's telling folks she stole from him. Spread enough of that in town, someone will sell you out. He bent down, picked up his rifle slowly. I'm heading west come morning. Don't plan to be here when the dogs arrive. Why tell me? Silas looked up. Because once I tracked a woman who was actually running from a husband. Didn't get to her in time. She was in pieces when I found her. Been trying to balance the scale since. He turned, began walking toward the trees, then stopped. You've got maybe 3 days, less if they bring horses. He was gone before Wade could reply. Clara watched from the window as Wade returned. The tightness in his gait told her enough. Finn brushed past her, panting quietly. She moved from the hearth to the door just as Wade stepped inside, shedding snow from his shoulders. You saw him, she said. Wade nodded. Silas Glay. Tracker. Her lips parted. Is he dangerous? No, Wade replied, pausing to remove his coat. Not today, but others are coming soon. Clara glanced at her children. Eva had just begun to smile in her sleep. Elias gurgled softly, chewing on his own mitten. She felt her stomach turn. Then we can't stay. I won't risk them. Wade said. And though his voice was calm, something hard burned behind his eyes. There's a village north of here. Lakota, Joseph's people. If we move soon, we can reach them. Clara looked at him. You know them? Wade gave a slow nod. I spent a winter there long ago after I lost my family. There was silence. Then Clara said softly. They were your wife and daughter, weren't they? Wade turned his face toward the fire. My daughter's name was Lena. She was 5 the night it happened. I was only supposed to be gone for an hour. He sat, voice low and level, but his hands shook as he opened a tin of dried beans. I built this cabin because it was the only place I didn't see them. Clara knelt beside him, her hand resting on his wrist. I am sorry. He looked at her and something in his expression softened just enough to let light through. You reminded me of her, he said. The way you hold your kids, the way you kept walking even after the world ended. Clara swallowed hard. So what do we do now? Wade stood. We get ready to leave at first light. That night, as they packed, Clara gathered only what they could carry: 2 sets of baby clothes, a wrap, tin of goat's milk, Joseph's wedding band, which she'd worn on a cord around her neck. Wade packed dried meat, a flint kit, and his father's hunting knife. He also packed something else, a faded red bonnet, small enough for a 5-year-old, tucked quietly between his shirts. They slept in shifts. Wade took first watch, sitting in a chair by the door, rifle across his lap. Finn lay beside him, ears twitching at every sound beyond the walls. In the darkest hours of morning, Clara dreamt of her childhood home. Snow piled high against the porch rails, her mother humming near the stove, her father wiping frost from his beard. She dreamt of Joseph too, his deep voice singing in Lakota as he carved shapes from antlers for the children he never got to meet. She woke to a cry: Elias, hungry and cold, and held him close as the fire hissed low. Then, just before dawn, Finn stood up. Every hair on the dog's body bristled. He walked to the door, silent. Wade was up instantly, rifle in hand. From outside came a sound, not footsteps, but barking. Low, muffled, then more. 2, 3, 4 dogs. Wade's voice was tight. They're here. Dawn did not break gently over the Bitterroot. It came as a warning, gray and heavy, dragging clouds like wool over a world already buried in white. Winds surged low between the pines, carrying not bird song, but the bay of distant hounds. Clara Ridgeway held Eva tightly against her chest, heart pounding in rhythm with the storm that hadn't yet begun. Elias was strapped securely to her back with a fur sling, his breath warm against her neck. Wade Ashford stood at the cabin door, rifle in one hand, a leather pack over his shoulder. His coat was lined with buffalo hide, stitched with repairs from winters past. His hair was tied back, eyes sharp and grim. Finn stood by his side, the German shepherd's coat thick and bristled, tail rigid, nose to the door crack, sniffing the invisible storm ahead. Clara took one last look around the cabin, the cot, the fire pit, the carved wooden horse beside the hearth. It had become home, and now it would become bait. Wade had already laid the trap, tracks leading from the back door toward the ravine, broken branches, boot prints in misleading directions. He'd buried the rifle he couldn't carry and left one log smoldering to give the illusion of recent presence. "They'll reach the cabin by midday," he said softly. "They'll think we're not far, and we won't be." Clara replied. "We'll just be gone." They left without sound. Their path took them northeast along an old game trail Wade remembered from years before. It curled through birch and pine, climbing steadily into the high ridges above the valley. Snow fell in small drifting flakes, almost gentle, like the forest trying to keep their secret. Clara didn't speak for a long time. Her breath fogged the scarf tied across her mouth, her legs burning from the effort of walking uphill with 2 children and a satchel. Yet, she didn't falter. Every step was a vow. Wade kept glancing back at her, checking her gait, her eyes, the way she shifted her shoulders to balance the sling. He didn't need to ask if she could go on. He already knew she would. They passed through a narrow pass just before midday where boulders rose like frozen centuries on either side. From here, Wade could look down into the valley and see the dark smudge that was his cabin roof. Clara followed his gaze. "It looks so small from here." "It is," he nodded. "But it held so much." "Will they burn it?" she asked. "Maybe." Clara turned her face away. Beyond the pass, the trail steepened. Clara began to struggle on the icy switchbacks. Wade paused at a clearing, slung his pack off, and stepped toward her. "Give me Elias," he said. "You take the pack." She hesitated. "Are you sure?" He was already shifting the baby into his arms. Elias whimpered, then settled, cheek against Wade's shoulder. Clara put on the pack wordlessly. It was then that Finn growled from deep in his chest. Clara dropped to her knees behind a rock, shielding Eva. The first dog broke from the tree seconds later. A rangy hound, mottled gray and brown, tongue lolling, eyes wild, caught their scent and barked loud and fast. A man followed, burly, mid-30s, wearing a worn leather vest over a patched duster. His beard was streaked with ice. His right eye permanently squinted from an old scar. He was not Silas. He raised his shotgun, but Finn lunged before he could aim. The shepherd hit him square in the chest, sending him backward into the snow. The gun discharged into the air. Clara screamed. Another man appeared at the ridge above, leaner, clean-shaven, aiming a rifle down at them. Wade didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee, rested Elias on the snowbank beside Clara, and fired once. The second man fell. The echo of the shot rippled down the mountainside. Finn was grappling with the first tracker in the snow, snarling and snapping. The man yelled, tried to punch him off, but Finn was stronger, more precise. Clara reached for a rock, heart racing, but the man stopped struggling. Finn stood panting, blood on his fur. Wade pulled Clara up. "We go now." They didn't bury the men. There wasn't time. Wade did, however, pull their coats and spare weapons. "No sense letting what's useful rot," he said flatly. Clara said nothing. She was shaking but not crying, just silent, focused. The rest of the day passed in numb urgency. The snow thickened again by afternoon, covering the trail behind them. The babies slept off and on, the cold exhausting them. Wade led, Finn scouting ahead. Clara walked in the hollow of Wade's footprints, placing her boots exactly where his had landed. By dusk, the trees thinned and they reached a plateau that overlooked the distant forest. Wade stopped, raising a hand. Smoke curled up from beyond a hill, a different shape than firewood, rounder, more deliberate. "That's them," he said. "The village." Clara stared at the shape, tents, a longhouse, thin trails of smoke from cooking fires, a scattering of people moving like shadows. Suddenly, she fell to her knees, not from injury, but from release. It was over, or so she thought. A whistle cut the air. Then, hoofbeats from the southern tree line. 3 riders emerged. One in front, dressed in gray wool and a dark coat. His beard trimmed, his posture too upright to be a trapper. Clara's breath froze in her lungs. Galen Thornwright. He'd come himself. Behind him, 2 hired men rode with long guns slung across their backs. They were still far but gaining. Wade raised the rifle, aimed briefly, then lowered it. "No," he said. "We run." Clara took Elias back, and they moved down the hill toward the edge of the Lakota camp. A woman appeared at the boundary, elderly, wrapped in furs. Her face was lined and dark, her eyes sharp as needles. Nina Tall Elk. Wade knew her. She'd been the village healer when he came years ago. Still was by the look of it. She raised her hand when she saw him. Clara stumbled forward. "Please," she gasped. "My children." Nina stepped aside and gestured them in. They crossed the threshold of the village as Galen shouted behind them. "That's my wife. She's kidnapped. They're armed. They'll kill the children." Nina turned to Wade, her voice low. "There's no time for talk." She led them behind the nearest tent. And just before the curtain fell, Clara looked back. Galen had reached the edge of the camp. But he wasn't smiling. He was holding a badge. A federal marshal star. The village of Red Creek Ridge stirred beneath the sky of lead. Snow fell softly now, no longer a threat, but a veiled muting sound, cloaking movement. Wade Ashford stood in the shadows behind Nina Tall Elk's lodge, his rifle hidden beneath a wool blanket, eyes trained on the riders approaching from the ridge. Finn sat at his heel, silent, focused, his ears pinned in muscles taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Beside them, Clara Ridgway clutched Eva in her arms and rocked Elias against her chest. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, her cheeks pale from cold. But her eyes, green and glinting, had never burned brighter. The edge of fear had been replaced by something else, something closer to fury. Across the village clearing, Galen Thornwright reigned in his black gelding. His gray wool coat was pristine despite the terrain, and the tin badge glinting from his chest caught every drop of light. His beard was neatly trimmed, his gloves polished. To the untrained eye, he looked like order incarnate. Justice even. But Wade knew the look in his eyes. It wasn't righteousness. It was ownership. Galen's voice carried like a shout through a sermon. "Federal Marshal Thornwright, acting under territorial authority. I'm here for the retrieval of Clara Thornwright and her children. Stolen from my home by armed fugitives." Gasps whispered through the crowd. Warriors emerged from lodges. Women gathered their children. Some recognized Clara's face, half Lakota, half outsider, and remembered her late husband, Joseph. Clara stepped forward before Wade could stop her. The wind fluttered her shawl, revealing the sling across her chest, where Elias lay half asleep. "I am not your wife," she said. "You cast me out with nothing. I walked barefoot through snow with 2 newborns. And now you come here with dogs and guns." "You're confused," Galen replied, his voice oily smooth. "The cold, the stress. I forgive you. I brought medical aid. We can take you home where you'll be safe." He turned toward the soldiers behind him. "Retrieve her gently." That was his mistake. From the far side of the gathering, Wise Elk, the tribal elder, stepped forward. He was thin but upright, white braids hanging beside a weathered face that had seen 4 generations of storms. His voice was not loud, but it cut the air like a blade. "This is not your land, Thornwright, and she is not your wife." "She's a fugitive," Galen shot back. "She is Joseph Golden Sky's widow," Wise Elk countered. "These are his children, our blood." Galen's hand twitched toward his sidearm. "You want to challenge federal law, old man?" Clara's voice came sharp and clear. "Then read the law. Joseph and I were married by a circuit preacher in Hamilton. I took his name. You and I were never wed. You promised me safety in exchange for silence. And when I told you the truth, you threw us into a blizzard." She reached beneath her shawl and drew out a leather pouch, placing it into Mina's hands. Mina opened it. Inside, a folded document bearing a preacher's seal and a tin locket with a photo of Clara and Joseph taken in better days. The moment was brief. Then Galen's men fired. A shot rang through the clearing, striking the ground inches from Wise Elk's feet. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Warriors raised bows. Finn launched into motion. Wade was already moving, rifle rising. But Clara stepped forward again, shielding the children with her own body. "Stop," she shouted. "If I fall, who do you become?" "A man who shoots a mother before her people." Galen's hands trembled. Wade was 10 feet away. "You pull that trigger," he said coldly. "And I'll put you in the snow before your horse hits the ground." Galen's finger flexed. Then a second voice rang out, female, sharp. "I found these near his ranch house," said Wounded Star, the Lakota warrior who had once doubted Clara's right to belong. She held a tattered bundle of blood-stained baby clothes, partially frozen, and a woman's torn shawl. "These are what he left her with." She threw them at Galen's feet. Captain Glay, the same federal captain Silas had warned of, rode into view behind the scene, flanked by 2 legitimate soldiers. His coat bore the real badge. He looked from the wreckage of proof to the blood on Galen's knuckles to the pistol shaking in his hand. "You forged your authority," he said. "You filed a false claim of marriage, and you aimed to kill the woman you claimed as your wife." Clara whispered. "Now the world knows." Galen's shoulders sagged. Finn stepped forward and barked once, sharp. Galen's gun dropped into the snow. Glay dismounted. "Marshal Thornwright, you are under arrest for fraud, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice." Silas Glay appeared beside him, emerging from the trees like a ghost, as if he'd been watching all along. He nodded once at Wade. "I told you," Silas said softly. "Every storm leaves a trail." Galen was shackled and taken away, his badge stripped, his wealth meaningless now. The crowd slowly dispersed. Fires were rekindled. Children laughed again. Clara sat in the snow beside Nina's fire, cradling both babies. Wade sat beside her, silent. Nina brought them tea. "You are safe now," she said. "But safety is not stillness. What will you do?" Clara looked at Wade. Wade looked at the babies. "We build." 2 summers later, Clara stood at the edge of a small wooden schoolhouse built near the river bend where the pine trees met the grasslands. Children ran past her in moccasins and leather vests, laughing. Eva led them with a feather in her braid. Elias, smaller but bold, tried to keep up. Wade carved benches in the shade. His beard was trimmed, his back straighter now. Finn slept in the sun, old but content. Red Creek Ridge had become a haven for those who crossed worlds like Clara, for those who lost homes like Wade, and for those born into both. Wounded Star now taught the tribal language to mixed-race children. Nina, though slower now, still blessed each new life born. At night, Clara sang Joseph's songs, now with her own voice, words of love that had crossed fire, snow, and silence. And when winter came again, it no longer felt like death, it felt like proof that they had survived. Together, sometimes the fiercest storms reveal the deepest grace. Clara's journey through snow and silence wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a reminder that no matter how lost we feel, God never leaves us wandering. He sends help in the form of strangers, animals, and quiet courage we didn't know we had. In a world that can be cold and cruel, the Lord still works miracles through the kindness of others, through justice that prevails, and through the healing power of love. So, if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless everyone who watches this on Real Stories.